What's up, everybody? Welcome to Bios3 Raw TV. Excuse me. Today we're going to talk about something. I got an email from an individual who had watched my glycogen and food types video and then sent me an email and asked me to talk about carbohydrates and vascularity. And I thought it was interesting because carbohydrates actually have very little to do with vascularity. I mean, it's part of the equation, but overall have very little. Vascularity is very genetic, and depending on, you know, the person's genetics as how vascular they are, they could be vascular through their forearms, through their shoulders. There's different kinds of veins, like varicose veins and shit that show up, like Paul Dillette had through his shoulders. I actually have one of those in my calf. And then, like, there's people that, you know, they could be fucking 500 pounds and they'd be, well, not 500 pounds, but they could be really heavy and vascular. Other people, you know, very lean and not vascular. So I've seen people like, you know, for instance, Flex Wheeler. Flex was very lean, but vascularity-wise, he wasn't the most vascular person around. Person to person, it could vary depending on the foods that you eat, but vascularity has more to do with blood pressure, blood volume, water, and salt. Those things are what actually will increase vascularity or decrease vascularity. Now, a way that I tested this many, many years ago and figured it out was different diuretics cause different responses due to sodium uptake, water and sodium uptake. Now, aldactone, which is supposed to be the milder diuretic, started it about 3 or 4 days, and about 2 days before the show, and I noticed my body flattened out very quickly. And I was eating a sweet potato, or it was a yam or a sweet potato, it doesn't really matter, every hour that Friday, and then, well, Thursday night and all day Friday. So my carbs are very, very high. And after I took the aldactone, I noticed I started to flatten out. Now, I also started to cut water that Friday at the same time. Now, what I didn't know at the time, and I went on to learn later by looking up the actual medical actions of aldactone, not bodybuilding forums, not, you know, asking friends. I actually had to look up the medical index. And it said that aldactone does not allow sodium uptake or sodium reuptake or water reuptake. So now basically what you have is a potassium sparing diuretic that doesn't allow sodium to get back inside the muscle with the water. Therefore, there's no way to actually get that volume to the muscle, feel full with the aldactone. So now as your body's pulling sodium, pulling water with that diuretic, you're eating plenty of carbohydrates, but the vascularity and the pump and the fullness is gone. Because you need water and you need sodium to be able to load those carbohydrates into the muscle. So right off the bat, I figured out very quickly that aldactone, although sometimes people will use it and they nail their conditioning. So, you know, again, person to person, it can vary how diuretics work with your body. But the aldactone for me very quickly made me realize that, because it took me a good maybe 3 days, maybe a little bit longer after I took the last aldactone before my body actually filled out again. So there was a period of time where my body just wouldn't uptake any sodium or very little sodium that I was taking in. And obviously my potassium levels were probably through the roof because it's potassium sparing, and I just kept peeing all the water out. So I figured, okay, well, if this is the case, this is probably not the best way for me to peak for a show. And obviously it pretty much destroyed everything I worked for that 16 weeks leading up to that show. Well, it was 12 or 16 weeks. Anyways, died on my ass off, trained very hard, excuse me, got sick, got through the sickness, and actually looked right on target 48 hours before the show. I looked so bad the day of the show that I couldn't figure out what it went wrong. And I listened to an individual who I trusted that, you know, was a national level competitor who had been around a while and helped a lot of people with shows, and he didn't actually know that information about how aldactone worked. So right after that, what I decided to do was, 2 weeks later was the Lehigh. This is 2007. I decided to not work with anybody, do it myself. And I said, okay, diazide is the one I'm going to use. Diazide is potassium sparing, but it will allow water and sodium uptake after the diuretic is taken. So it's going to pull water and sodium, but if you take in salt, you take in water, it'll allow some of that to get back in the muscle and fill you out. So if you start to flatten out, lose your vascularity, you can use the salt and the water to fill back out. That's exactly what I did. And that's when I realized it's not the carbs that are responsible for the pump. It's not the carbs that are responsible for the vascularity. It's the water and sodium because you have plenty of carbs, and you can keep eating carbs, eating carbs, eating carbs. But 2 days after the show, what have you done? You've actually rehydrated again and taken usually a bunch of salt because you're eating foods that you normally don't eat, but you already had, 300, 400, 500 grams of carbs a day leading up to the show. So carbs, you were totally carved up, but you depleted in water and sodium. So therefore, the two things that make vascularity respond the best, water and sodium. Now, how do you find out how much water and how much sodium to take in? That varies from person to person. Most people, I'm not saying all, most people that are healthy individuals will be able to drink as much water as humanly possible. And I'm not saying overdose yourself on water like 3 or 4 gallons and fucking drop dead. I'm saying it's like 1.5 gallons of water, maybe 2 gallons a day if you really push it, and you're gonna get drier and drier and drier. Now, you pull the sodium out of that, and you'll notice that you may dry out, but you're gonna be flat. So, okay, now, what really is the main key for that fullness? You can have plenty of water, you can have plenty of carbs, but without the sodium, you're flat and you're not vascular. So basically it all boils down to sodium content, how much sodium is in the body. Again, how much sodium you take in varies from person to person. It depends on, how your body, uses the sodium, uses the water, uses the carbohydrates. Depends on how your body uses whatever diuretic you've used, whether it's a natural diuretic, whether it's a prescription-based diuretic. There's all these things that come into play that I think people just, underestimate the power of all these other things, and they look at carbohydrates and say, oh, I gotta pump up, I need more carbs. First thing people do before they go, backstage before a show is they have like Reese's peanut butter cups. Say, oh, I have some sugar carbs. Did you know if you just add a little bit of water and about a little salt packet, threw that in your mouth and went and pumped up, that you blow up like a fucking balloon without any extra carbs? It's not the carbs, it's the sodium and I'm trying to drive and not crash my car here. The sodium that's in those Reese's peanut butter cups that you usually have been cutting out. A lot of people cut their sodium for long periods of time. When you introduce sodium again, you get this great pump. Lo and behold, the magic happens and people blame it on, I had some sugar and it was the extra carbs. So like I said, never take my word for anything. Go to the medical indexes and look at how these things work. Do some research on your own, but this is like some basic knowledge that I think really successful prep coaches understand and know, and they know how to manipulate that water, sodium, and carbohydrate mix so that they can bring their people in as dry as they can on the day of the show, but as full as they can. And I have actually experimented throughout the years, have come in flat but dry, full but a little too bloated. I've nailed the conditioning, a couple times. I've nailed the fullness a couple times. It's very hard to get all of those things to be working together on the day of the show. Even the top pros in the world, like Ronnie Coleman, Jay Cutler, Dorian Yates, even they only hit it usually right about once in their career to where they're perfect on stage that day. Other than that, it's all going back and forth, trying to get that result again. And, even with the knowledge, sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium, water, carbohydrates, even with all that knowledge, it's still tough to hit. biohackertraining@gmail.com. Leave comments down below, but don't fight. www.biohackertraining.com is the site. It's the sodium gives you the pump bicep, and we're out.